In the next 30 days, I will touch 4 continents. I will meet hundreds of people. Some are strangers, some are old friends. I will leave some of them behind me, and I will keep some of them with me forever. I will visit the distant corners of the world and travel further than I ever have. Many questions will be asked of me, and I'll need to find the answers. My mum cried quietly as she waved me off at the station this morning, and if all goes well, I will have circumnavigated the planet before I see her again. For a few seconds, as she slipped from view, I felt uneasy, unsure of my own abilities to survive and thrive out here on my own. But now my stomach is just tingling with excitement and full with gratitude that I've got the chance to begin this adventure. Hi, my name's Harry, I'm an English teacher and I live in Hong Kong. And this place is now my home because 10 years ago when I was 18 years old, I decided to completely leave my comfort zone behind. So since we couldn't travel, I thought I'd reflect on this time in my life and the big decision that changed my life forever. I want to talk about how starting before I was ready and plunging myself into a world that I knew nothing about at a very young age completely changed my life. So when I was 17, I was attending a secondary school in England in a very quiet town that was not very diverse. Everybody came from the same sort of background, everybody had the same kind of cultural experiences, and I hadn't really met many people who didn't look and sound like me. Then an opportunity came along through an exchange program to broaden my horizons and travel to Hong Kong. Now the opportunity was to teach drama in a secondary school in Hong Kong, and I remember feeling very nervous and insecure. I told myself that, you never know if you can do something until you try it, so I decided to take it on and sign up. Now at this point, it's very important to acknowledge my privilege and say that I couldn't have done any of this if I wasn't a British passport holder, and also if my parents hadn't helped me with money for plane tickets and stuff like that. So I am very, very lucky to have had that opportunity, and that's definitely a huge factor in me being able to do all the things that I have done since then. Doubts. Now, there are many reasons why this was potentially a bad idea. I was only 18 and didn't really feel confident teaching other people who were only a few years younger than me. I'd never lived alone, never taken care of myself. I didn't really know how to cook, how to clean. I had never lived in a big city before, and I didn't really know how to look after myself on any level. So anyway, I got on a train with my friend to the airport and we began our journey around the world. We had about a month where we were traveling around before we reached Hong Kong. We flew to LA and from there to New Zealand, where we spent some time with my friend's family, and then we flew to Sydney, finally arriving in our destination of Hong Kong about a month later. I had no experience of making my money last and budgeting and thinking of the future, so I spent almost all my money in the first week in LA, which is like a really tempting place for an 18-year-old boy with a wallet full of US dollars to go crazy in. We stayed on Venice Beach, which was a really, really amazing, cool community of people in a hostel where I met people from all over the world, from different walks of life, some of whom didn't really follow traditional kind of like careers and life paths and stuff like that, and I remember that having a real influence on me. We went downtown and saw the bright lights of all the tower blocks. We drove up Mulholland Drive and saw all the places where the Hollywood movie stars live. I even went to a Lakers game and saw Kobe Bryant play basketball, which was an absolutely unforgettable experience, and I can still picture him flying through the air and not really understanding how gravity was not like pulling him down. We left that game and ended up somewhere in South Central Los Angeles. It was getting dark. The place we were in seemed pretty rough and pretty kind of dangerous. The kind of place that I'm sure is absolutely fine if you know your way around and if you're confident, but we were young, we clearly stood out as outsiders there, and we were very keen to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. I'd actually love to go back to that area someday and see what it's like if, for example, you had someone who knew the area to show you around, because I know a little bit more about the world than I did when I was 18 now, and maybe I wouldn't have found it so scary. Then on to New Zealand, where I honestly discovered the wonders of nature and the outdoors in a way that I'd never done while living in the UK. New Zealand is a stunningly beautiful country with amazingly friendly people, and I remember getting the impression that I wouldn't really ever like to live there. It seemed a bit quiet and sleepy for that, but in terms of getting outdoors and kayaking, hiking, camping, and all those things, honestly, it was a transcendently beautiful experience and I loved it. On to Sydney, where we met up with a few friends from our school who were living in a van out there at the time, and we just cruised around with them for a while, causing mischief and getting up to no good. And then finally, we arrived in Hong Kong, which was the first place that we travelled to where I genuinely didn't know what to expect. Last night as we drove back from the airport, the lights and the size of the buildings was a little overwhelming. The idea that behind every one of those twinkling squares, stacked on top of each other, lies a person, a whole household, and a story every bit as complex as my own. I couldn't take it in. I woke up this morning and saw a solitary mountain out of one window and a set of high-rise blocks on the other side. When I stepped outside, I found a different world to the one I'd imagined. Across the road is a dilapidated housing estate, dull brown and grey. The residents seem to all be over the age of 80. Some sit outside in the communal spaces playing mahjong, others doing solitary exercise, and still others drinking beer and chatting with their friends. A couple of miles from here lies one of the world's financial hubs, designer stores and award-winning restaurants. But this is a place that time has forgotten. Roasted goose hung on a hook, dried fish and sea cucumbers sold for medicinal purposes, the butcher hacking through bone on a well-worn wooden board, selling every part of the animal he can. So they were my reflections on the little housing estate outside the school where we were staying on my first day when we arrived here, and I remember thinking this was just a completely different world to anything I'd ever experienced before. This estate seemed completely isolated from anything around it. It was up on top of a great big hill, and it was a long walk down to the nearest town. And the people there seemed to live in their own private little sphere. They all seemed to be really old and hanging around with nothing really to do outside. The place was kind of grim and depressing and quite dull and uniform. All the buildings looked the same. And I remember thinking that this was so different from the more vibrant places that we'd been to previously. But then slowly, as time went on, we worked our way further and further out from the housing estate where we were staying, and we got to know more about Hong Kong. That estate as well was completely ethnically homogenous in terms of being Chinese, and my friend and I were the only white people in the shopping centre, in the marketplace, walking through the estate. So we drew the eyes of the residents there for a long time. People would look at us and not really understand why we were there, but slowly they realised that we were actually teaching their children and grandchildren, and eventually all those old people started giving us a little wave and a little smile. But that took weeks and months of us being in that community before we really felt kind of accepted by the people who lived around us. Now, of course, Hong Kong is a completely globalized city, and it may well be that my reflection of sticking out was more in my head than it was in the heads of the people living in the housing estate, but it was a very isolated place. So slowly but surely, we started taking bus and train rides further and further into the city and discovering all of the amazing pleasures that Hong Kong had to offer, including making friends and getting outside of the city to go hiking and surfing and seeing the beaches and the trails and the amazing countryside and country parks. So people outside Hong Kong don't really know that Hong Kong is mostly green when you look at it from the sky. It's actually mostly country parks, mountains, beaches, islands. It's made up of over 280 islands, and that side of Hong Kong doesn't really make it out. And as well as venturing further afield, bit by bit I started to pick up the survival skills that I would need for my adult life. I learned how to cook, I learned how to clean, I learned how to look after myself. I finally learned to budget my money and not spend it all on the day I got my paycheck. And most importantly, I learned how to make friends from different cultures and from all around the world. When I got home, I attended university, and honestly I didn't find any of that stuff scary anymore, because I'd already lived by myself, I'd already been far away from my family, and I'd already had to make new friends in a new environment. So I really felt at ease when I started university, at a time when lots of young people are kind of intimidated by that process. And honestly, I felt like my travel completely prepared me for that. After finishing uni, I felt like I still had unfinished business with Hong Kong, so as soon as I could, I obtained a teaching qualification and moved back out here. So the reason I've reflected on this time in my life is because if I had waited until I felt completely ready to do this thing, then I probably never would have done it, and I never would have gained all of those experiences which have helped me so much in my life. So apart from just reflecting on how lucky I was to have this whole opportunity to travel and see different parts of the world, what I reflect on most is that if I'd waited until I felt like I was ready, then perhaps I would never have done any of these things, and I would have missed out on all of this fantastic life experience and all of the amazing sights and sounds and memories that I now have. So it reminds me that if you feel unsure about whether you're capable of doing something, just dive right in and see what happens, because I think we regret the things we don't do far more than the things we do. And the other lesson that I would have to give is about documenting these things. I'm so glad that I've got diary entries from that time to reflect on how I felt and what I was thinking, but I really, really wish I had taken more pictures and much more video footage. Specifically, I really wish that I had more footage of the camera pointed at me, because I know it's seen as kind of vain now for people to walk around with a camera pointed at themselves, but I can't tell you what I would give for more footage of 18-year-old me discovering all this stuff for the first time. You know, the look of wonder on my face, the big grin on my face as I'm seeing the big bright lights of Hong Kong, as I am exploring and meeting new people. You know, of course I took pictures and I took a few videos at the time, but I really wish that I'd documented more, and I wish that I'd turned the camera more on myself and really had those concrete memories to look back on. So there are two take-home messages from this. Start before you're ready and document as much as you can, because when you're old and grey, you're going to wish you did a hell of a lot more, and you're going to wish that you documented a hell of a lot more. So if there's a big decision that you're trying to make, or if there's something that you're in the middle of doing right now, then take these two bits of advice. I hope they're helpful. Thanks for joining me on this little trip down memory lane. I hope it was interesting. It was definitely interesting for me, and I hope you can take the message of starting before you're ready and documenting your experiences into your own life. Cheers.